You're listening to the Rainmaking Podcast, hosted by high-stakes headhunter, author, and professional speaker, Scott Love.
You're listening to the Rainmaking Podcast, and my name is Scott Love. Thanks for joining me on the show. I try to get right to the point with these to make sure that these episodes are worth your while. And we're going to do that in this episode today. And I'm really excited about what you're going to learn. The topic is how to improve lawyer engagement in business development. If you're not a lawyer, this is still going to work for you if you're in professional services. And my guest is Lynn Tellefsen Stehle. Lynn is an expert in law firm marketing and business development. In fact, she worked as a business development manager for Denton's and worked for almost 12 years with Cahill as their global director of marketing and communications. She works for a company called Nexel, which is a software company. She's their head of client collaboration, and their company helps lawyers, marketers, and business developers work together to grow the firm. Make sure you connect with Lynn. Look for her contact info on the show notes. So wherever you listen to the podcast, go to the show notes and you'll be able to connect directly with Lynn. And if you've got some time, I'd really appreciate going to Apple Podcast and writing a nice 5-star review and mentioning Lynn by name. I know she'd appreciate that, and I would also. As always, this show is sponsored by Leopard Solutions Legal Intelligence Suite of Products, Firmscape, and Leopard BI. Push ahead of the pack with the power of Leopard. And now here's my conversation with my friend, Lynn Tellefsen Stehle. Thanks for listening. Hey, this is Scott Love with the Rainmaking Podcast. Our special guest today is Lynn Tellefsen Stehle. And today we're talking about how to improve lawyer engagement in business development. Lynn, thanks for joining me on the show today.
It's great to be here, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited to dig into this. You've got a rich depth of expertise in this area. And even though we're talking about improving lawyer engagement, if somebody's listening and they're not in the legal industry, if they're in professional services, I'm sure these concepts can be malleable and still apply. So let me ask you this, in terms of somebody that's listening to this that might be in a leadership role, what do you think the main problems are that keep lawyers from getting more engaged in business development? Let's kind of start in that line of conversation.
Sure thing. I think the first would be the recognition that the skills in business development are different from the skills it takes to practice law and deliver good service. So there's that recognition and whether or not it's a priority. And I think in my experience, those who are very successful in their business development prioritize business development activities.
Yeah, right. Let me kind of go down this line, because I know partners, very successful partners. They are amazing at their practice, at what they do, very detailed. They earn the client trust because of the work that they do. Mm-hmm. But some of them have confessed to me they feel this hypocrisy, and they feel it's contrived when they feel like they have to go out and sell themselves and actually do the work it takes to get and build those relationships. They feel, I don't know, maybe they feel it's beneath them. Maybe they shouldn't have to do that. Let's kind of start attitudinally. What do you think what should their philosophy be to overcome that hurdle? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a matter of comfort and proclivity, frankly. I mean, business development training isn't typically given in school, right? So there has to be a comfort level, number one, and an integration of those activities into the day-to-day. So making it a habit and making it just as a matter of course in how you serve your clients. So for instance, being a connector, typically there's a value to your network and those in your network. So attitudinally, I think the answer is to how can I be of service to those in my network, whether that's a referral source or a prospect or a client. I think that should be top of mind.
I like that, because I think when that person that I'm thinking about, that person is not what I would categorize as a swashbuckling rainmaker. He's not going to be the life of the party.
Sure.
But I know that person would feel really comfortable thinking, how can I be of service to those in my network? I like that idea a lot.
That just brings up another thought for me that I'd love to share, which is The composition of the composition of a team, and in this case, the composition of a team of lawyers, is something that's important to take into consideration. So for leadership of the firm, look at who has the different skills and plug them in where their interests intersect. So what do I mean by that?
Yeah, right.
There are some folks who are geared toward client planning and client service. They're great with the clients. They help strengthen relationships, improve the service delivery. And then there are other folks who are more comfortable on the golf course, are more comfortable in the cocktail party. So recognizing that and allowing folks to participate where it intersects with their comfort level, I think is a really helpful way to look at it. And I do know some firms that are focusing their lawyers on either client development and client planning or on what we would call business development or growth or new client intake. So recognizing that and meeting folks where they're at, I think provides a level of comfort and a greater likelihood of success.
Okay, that's great. So maybe we could kind of go down this path and kind of segment what are those areas of a high-functioning business development organization, a team of lawyers, so to speak, so that we can identify, okay, I need to have a quarterback over here. I need to have somebody in this position, who's going to be first base, who's going to be the left field. What are the different team parts that you've seen within teams of lawyers that are effective in doing business development?
Sure. Well, there's typically the point of contact, your contact partners, your relationship partners, those folks who are kind of front and center and on top of existing and future client needs, right? There are folks on the administrative side who are helping connect the data dots, so to speak, to help show how clients are consuming content. What does their participation in events look like? All of those funnel type of things. And delivering that internally so that there's a proactive, sustained, focused effort on client needs both today and tomorrow. So it is a team sport and everyone plays a role. And, obviously in the law firm context, there's different expertise that the lawyers are bringing in, matter to matter, as it were, and as it grows. So taking all of that into consideration is important. So client teams, sector-focused marketing, strategic initiatives that are happening throughout the firm that every lawyer is engaged in and knows his or her role. And that differs, firm to firm, whether you're a boutique firm with, 300 lawyers or you're a much larger firm. So the structures change.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's great. What if there's somebody that's just not chipping in to where they need to be on the team? Let's say there's somebody that people know what their roles are, but they're just not, for whatever reason, they're just not contributing to the team. What do you think that leader should do with that individual? How do you think they should handle that person?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think ideally there would be some support in the form of coaching. I think business development coaches are really important. And whether they're internally provided, so you have your very specialized marketing and BD folks internally. And I'll share with you that in my experience in 17 years at law firms in the business development and marketing capacity, I was really underutilized in my team. Yeah. There are resources, and these resources absolutely should be recognized and used. But I do believe that coaching is important because people's lives change, right? So we need to understand why that's the case is what I'm saying, Scott. And people have situations and it ebbs and flows. And that's why it's so important to make business development a habit and to integrate it into your day-to-day. Yeah. Because when you do that, when, the stuff hits the fan, so to speak, and life takes a curveball, you have that momentum to sustain you. And also working in a team is important because you have the rest of the team to also help. So my answer to that is you need to understand specifically what's at the root of that and meet folks where they're at to provide them with the level of support they need. And that level of support is going to change. It's dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One thought I had as you're describing this, And I'm envisioning, here's a firm, whether it's a small, medium, or large firm, it doesn't matter, a team that's working together. Think about a team leader that understands how to lead the team. They know how to do the things that you're talking about. What are the strengths and deficits people have? How can I put them in these roles? How do we get regular habits? And habits, as you know, those carry you forward even when you don't feel like it. The habits are going to do that because you've got that rhythm and that cadence, so to speak. What I've seen is that this is a good story to recruit other rainmakers. If a firm has this is a story that
Yes.
they can tell to prospective laterals. Let me tell you about our team. Let me tell you about the rituals that we have and the recognition that we have. Let me tell you about how we're structured internally, not just the marketing and the business development people, our colleagues, but the attorneys, and how we work and how we take our non-billable time and we're working together in the service of our clients. And by the way, we benefit because we get the call and we get more business from that. I think what you have described, I think we could take that. The double advantage of that is, oh, yes, it's going to be good for business development, but it's also going to be good for recruiting partners. And what most people don't realize is that you recruit a partner that has a big book of business. It's not the book. Look at the client relationships. That relationship that follows that new partner on day one, the trust starts on day one also. The trust that he or she has built with the several dozen C-suite executives over decades. All that trust starts on day one. And as you know, trust is where business development really, really begins. So let me ask you this. Can you tell me a story of an organization where, and you don't have to say who it is or anything like that, or who the leader was, but this person made a decision. I want to get my people more involved. I want to help improving lawyer engagement. What was it like before they decided to do that? What action steps did they take to build that team, or maybe to lead it, or kind of shift the focus? And then what were the results of that?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to do that. And you brought up some really good points that shouldn't be. I just want to make one point before I answer that question, which is the business development infrastructure and foundation I've seen increasingly become important in that lawyer lateral recruiting, Scott, because they expect an infrastructure, they expect to have certain levels of support. And so it's really important, if you're a progressive, forward-reaching firm, to make sure that you have that so that folks know before they get there. And I will also share with you that I have been in several instances when I was in firms. Conference room E would call, and I would be called down to conference room E, and I would be met with a new prospective lateral partner. And the reason I was there was because that's exactly what they were asking. I want to speak to your head of marketing and business development, and I want to understand what kind of support I or my team is going to receive if we are to be here. And so I think I just want to point that out, that I think that's becoming increasingly important. I've seen that become a far more common question. And in the work I do today at Nexel, there is certainly positioning within firms that this resource is for your professional development as well as for the well-being of the firm. So getting back to your question, I know you asked a question. So getting back to the question, there was a recognition that there was a strategy and there was growth goals. And so the question became, how do we achieve our growth goals? And so the first step was looking at the infrastructure that we had and the composition of the team. And we conducted feedback interviews. Mm-hmm. So there was a survey and some interviews that we did internally to really get a better handle on what the needs of the group would be relative to the growth goals. And then from there, there was an infrastructure put in place internally to help to identify the needs, satisfy those needs, and then grow the program. Yeah. And the first step was a pilot program. And so that program was carefully kind of put together and chosen. And the pilot ran. It was extremely successful, and then it expanded from there. So I don't think that's unusual for really any organization. But certainly for a law firm or organization, when it comes to something new, having a pilot and being really close to it and handling it exclusively internally, and then shaping it and satisfying it seemed to be a winning formula.
And so how long did you know that you had proof of concept? This pilot program, this is working. How long did it take before you actually saw that you were bearing fruit from your efforts?
Sure, that's a great question. I recall it to be about 3 months.
Yeah, wow.
And 6 months was the duration of the program before it became sort of institutionalized.
That's
and
great.
Expanded, yes. I would also say that I do think it's common for folks to especially provide training and development in the business development sense for newly made partners.
Yeah. Tell me about that. What do you mean by that exactly?
So, the shift and transition as a support mechanism, I've certainly worked with firms that find it's important to provide that layer of support at that inflection point. So you're transitioning from being an associate to being a partner. Obviously, there's a whole range of concerns and new responsibilities and activities. And providing a more intensive, structured business development curriculum tends to be appreciated and put to good use. And not to say that there isn't value or that it isn't common to have associate business development programs. I see those happening far more frequently today than I did, say, 10 and 15 years ago. But to provide that level of support when you're assuming a new position is really important. And business development is, a purposeful initiative, ongoing initiative. And if you've not had that kind of training, really, how can you expect anyone to feel comfortable doing it?
That's
you
right.
need to sustain interest. And to sustain interest, you need the skills, you need a system, an approach that's sustainable for you, and you need to be plugged in by your firm into the places that you feel most comfortable and also have an opportunity to grow your own skills.
That's great.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you think that firms, should they say, okay, here it is, your introduction to business development, and 6 weeks later, good luck? Or should they have some sort of regular ongoing training and development related to that, pretty much for younger partners, any partner, associates? What have you seen as most effective in that regard?
Yeah, I think that you need to have a full structure. The firms should provide a full structure. So it's not a one and done. Absolutely not. I think folks can up-level their skills. I believe in coaching, in business development coaching. I think there are some great coaches out there and great systems out there. David Ackert comes to mind. Ross Fishman comes to mind. I learned my business development for legal training from the Flannery Institute, way back when. The point is to find a system or an approach that works for you and your firm and help folks to adopt it and support them along the trajectory of their business development journey. The goal, I think, is for lawyers to have a business that's intentional, where they can find the matters and the clients that they most want to work for and actualize their niche. So how do I find and merchandise my expertise? Let's say you're an FCPA lawyer.
Right.
I've done some great work and some investigations for some big clients. How can my marketing team help me to identify similarly situated prospects? So those are the matters that I want. And that comes down to, client planning, good marketing, sustained marketing, and creating the network. And creating that network ultimately comes down to your ability to strengthen and nurture relationships and organize them, and to handle as many of them as you can using all of the resources that are available to you. That's technology, that's internal resources, that's integrations that allow you to kind of connect the data dots to tell a story and peek around the corners so you can anticipate your client's needs. It's being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
That's harder to do these days than ever before, but it is more important, and it takes focus, and it takes a team. I think it takes a team anyway. If you have the resources, you should be using them.
Absolutely right. And I've seen some firms, I think they've done really well in finding innovative ways to do it. I think one of the legacy leaders in that space was Steve Bell, formerly with Womble, who was not chief business developer, it's chief sales officer. You had the S word in a title in a big, really good firm. And I remember talking with him about that. And he said, really, I mean, it summarized it succinctly in account management, where you're looking at those specific clients as accounts. How do we develop them? How do we find them, develop them? I thought that was really good. I think even our good friend Daryl Cross with Norton Rose Fulbright, internally, business development coach. I mean, who's a real better coach than someone that's really a coach than him? And so I think some firms had done really well by really making this a priority because, and I know we talked about this earlier, I think some partners, they just had this hesitation. Maybe they think it's lowbrow. Maybe they think I'm an introvert. I can't do this. I'm an attorney. That's why I went to law school and I want to be an attorney, but they've got to be successful and earning trust. And I like the way you talked about that earlier, that how can you be of service to other people? Think of it as a selfless endeavor where you're giving. And of course, it's going to get back to you and all that. But let me ask you this. How do you think COVID has impacted how people do business development? I can't believe it's been years since that happened. What do you think over the last 4 or 5 years? What do you think some of the changes are in how attorneys do business development?
Sure. And my mind is still thinking about what you said a few minutes ago. And I just want to note that I'm a real big fan of both Daryl and Steve for both of the reasons that you mentioned. And they're great examples of both external and internal folks. But I hear what you're saying about sales as an appetizing thought to me if I'm a lawyer in some instances. So to your question, COVID has changed the world dramatically in terms of business development. We see a greater return to in-person events, but we don't see folks in their offices as often. So there's more competition for those coveted spots where someone is in the office. For instance, I live in the New York metro area. Folks in New York City, they're there basically Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's what you're seeing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you have more in-person events and an appetite for in-person events because folks were starved of in-person events. It was much more difficult to do business development. And I think there's a fatigue, like a webinar fatigue. I know people, I don't know about you, but I know folks who sign up for webinars knowing that they can't attend, but they're interested in the content. And so they'll listen to it later. Do you know folks like that?
Oh, I do. I do. Download it. I'll listen to it when I'm on the treadmill doing dishes, or if I have to drive anywhere, I'll listen to it then, right?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of content now. That used to be the problem, right? There wasn't enough content. Well, COVID created a situation where firms were creating more content than they ever had before. So that it kind of solved the problem of how do we create content, whether that's audio, video, or written alerts or memoranda. So they've cured that. So there's a plethora. There's a lot of content. There's a lot of competition for attention.
Yeah.
There's a lot of problems with focus. There's problems with what I call context switching. It's much more difficult today to capture someone's attention and to keep it.
Yeah.
So that is one way that it's changed. And I think you're less likely. You want to get folks in person. That's the ultimate goal. How do we get folks to come to our event? And I think that's harder than ever before because folks just aren't in the office as much as they used to be. And everyone has a life.
Yeah, right.
You can't, and then you see it if you plan any kind of events, because when there's something going on in the city, there's so many more events and you can really feel that's a challenge.
And I think what you said, I agree. And I think that's interesting. And I hadn't really thought of it like that. I think people, they're like, well, instead of 6 events a year, I might only go to 2, maybe 3. And which ones are they? They're going to be conferences of trade associations, or like with Rain Dance for LSSO, Legal Sales and Service Organization. That's one that people are like, I'm definitely going to go there. So I think I think that's good. People can figure out, okay, what are the events that their clients are going to go to? And how can you put yourself in their path by sitting on a panel at that event? Now you look like the expert, right? Those are some tactical things that I'm sure we can dig into at some other time. But Lynn, let me ask you this. You've been a great guest on our show. You've given us some really good, actionable content. If somebody wanted to implement some of these ideas and really get started on this, what are 3 action steps you'd recommend that they should take to do so?
Sure. Step number 1, adopt a systematic approach. As a seller doer, you need to have a systematic approach to client planning and business development that's sustainable.
Great.
One approach I particularly like is the snowball system by Mo Bunnell. And one of the reasons I like that is because it's so simple. It could be for any professional service. It's easy to follow, and it's easy to integrate into your day-to-day. And I think that's a big thing these days.
Yeah.
How do you integrate this into your day-to-day? Step 2, commit to business development. Make relationship management important. It is a priority, and you will have to carve out the time. Use your specialized resources, the Darryl Crosses, if you're fortunate enough to have someone like him. Use those resources. Step 3, get support. Put modern technology to work for you. I have the insight from working at Nexel to tell you that connecting the data dots to see the story and to be of greater service to those in your professional network is easier than ever before. I've heard from numerous business development coaches, maybe a lawyer can handle 9 to 12 relationships at a time. Maybe it's more. But use technology.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 steps, Scott.
That's great, Lynn.
Commitment, support.
I love it. I love it. And tell us about your company. Tell us about your offerings. What do you have? What do you do that you would like for our listeners to know?
Yeah, thank you. So I work at Nexel. Nexel is an all-in-one collaboration cloud. It's CRM, it's ERM, and it's a marketing system. And that's a former law firm CMO. Nexel, Scott, was the system that I always wanted, but didn't exist at the time. And I wanted it both for my lawyers and the business development aspect and for my marketing team. So imagine this. Imagine one system that unites top of funnel and true business development functionality into a single system. And that's Nexel. And I'm a big fan of less systems and more functionality.
Yeah, so that's great. I love it. Well, that's great. And for everybody listening, we're going to put Lynn's contact info on the show notes. So wherever you listen to this podcast, go there. We'll put her LinkedIn profile link as well as her company's website and other contact info. Lynn, thank you so much for being on the show. You've given us some really good content. I'm going to have you back on in the future. And thank you so much again for the generosity of your wisdom today.
Oh, thank you, Scott. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Rainmaking Podcast. For more information about our recruiting services for international law firms, visit our website at attorneysearchgroup.com. To inquire about having Scott speak at your next convention, conference, sales meeting, or executive retreat, visit therainmakingpodcast.com.